The rain hammered against the emergency room windows like bullets against armor plating. Sarah Martinez clutched her phone with trembling fingers. The screen cracked from when she dropped it earlier that evening. The call had come at 9:47 p.m., right in the middle of dinner with their two young children. The voice on the other end had been clinical, professional, terrifying in its measured tone. "Mrs. Martinez, this is Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been brought to our emergency department following a training accident at Fort Bradley. You need to come immediately." The drive to the hospital had been a blur of rain-slicked streets and flashing traffic lights. Sarah's mother had arrived within minutes to watch 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Jake, both of whom had looked up from their Mac and cheese with confused eyes when their mother grabbed her keys and rushed toward the door. She'd managed to kiss their foreheads and whisper that Daddy was hurt, but would be okay, though she had no idea if that was true. Now she stood in the parking lot outside Memorial Hospital's emergency entrance, her civilian clothes soaked through despite the umbrella she'd forgotten to bring. The automatic doors whooshed open and closed as medical personnel hurried in and out, each person moving with the kind of urgent purpose that made Sarah's stomach clench tighter. She'd been a military wife for 8 years, ever since she and Miguel had married right after his first deployment. She knew the risks that came with his job as a Special Forces medic. They'd talked about it during those long nights when he was preparing for missions, discussing everything from insurance policies to what she should tell the children if something happened. But knowing the risks intellectually and facing them in a fluorescent-lit hospital parking lot were two entirely different things. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pushed through the emergency room doors. The waiting area hit her like a wall of antiseptic smell mixed with human anxiety. Families clustered in plastic chairs, some crying quietly, others staring at their phones or the muted television mounted in the corner. The reception desk sat behind a wall of glass, staffed by two women who looked like they'd seen every type of crisis imaginable. "I'm here about my husband," Sarah said, approaching the window. Her voice cracked slightly on the word husband, and she cleared her throat. "Miguel Martinez. He was brought in from Fort Bradley." The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, typed something into her computer. "Mrs. Martinez? Yes, he's still being evaluated. The doctor will be out to speak with you as soon as possible. If you could just have a seat in the waiting area, someone will call your name." Sarah nodded and found an empty chair near the window. The rain continued its assault on the glass, creating rivulets that caught the parking lot lights and threw strange shadows across the waiting room floor. She tried calling Miguel's unit commander but got voicemail. She tried texting Miguel's best friend Carlos, who was also stationed at Fort Bradley, but received no immediate response. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Sarah watched the clock on the wall tick from 10:15 to 10:30 to 10:45. Other families were called back to see their loved ones, their faces showing either relief or deeper worry as they disappeared through the security doors that led to the treatment areas. Each time the doors opened, Sarah looked up hopefully, but her name never came. Around 11 p.m., a new shift arrived. Sarah noticed the change immediately because the security guard who had been stationed near the entrance was replaced by a younger man. This new guard was tall and broad-shouldered, probably in his late 20s, with the kind of military bearing that suggested recent service. He wore the standard hospital security uniform, but carried himself like someone who had worn a different kind of uniform not too long ago. Sarah tried to distract herself by reading magazines, but the words swam together on the page. She attempted to play a game on her phone, but her concentration was shot. Every few minutes, she would approach the reception desk to ask for updates, only to receive the same polite but uninformative response. The doctor would be out soon. By 11:30, Sarah's composure was beginning to crack. She'd been strong during Miguel's deployments, strong when he'd come home with injuries that took months to heal, strong through all the uncertainty that came with military life. But sitting in this waiting room, not knowing whether her husband was alive or dead, was testing every reserve of strength she'd built up over the years. She walked to the vending machine, more for something to do than because she was hungry or thirsty. as she fed dollar bills into the slot. Her hands shook so badly that the machine rejected the first two attempts. Behind her, she could hear the quiet conversations of other waiting families, fragments of worry and hope that made her feel less alone, but somehow more anxious at the same time. The new security guard had positioned himself near the main entrance, and Sarah noticed him watching the waiting area with careful attention. Unlike some security personnel who seemed detached from a human drama around them, this man appeared genuinely concerned about the people in his care. When an elderly woman struggled with a heavy door leading to the restrooms, he immediately moved to help her. When a child dropped a toy that rolled under a chair, he retrieved it with a smile. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Kids are asleep." Emma asked if Daddy would be home for breakfast. "I told her we'd know more in the morning. Stay strong, honey." The message brought tears to Sarah's eyes, but she blinked them back. She needed to stay in control, needed to be ready for whatever news the doctor would bring. She'd promised Miguel during their last serious conversation about his dangerous job that she would be strong for their children, no matter what happened to him. At 11:45, the security doors finally opened and a doctor emerged. He was a younger man in scrubs, his face showing the kind of exhaustion that comes from a long shift dealing with trauma. Sarah's heart leaped, but then he called a different name, and another family hurried forward to receive their news. Sarah sank back in her chair, fighting the growing panic that threatened to overwhelm her. In 15 minutes, it would be midnight. Miguel had been here for over 2 hours, and she still knew nothing about his condition, nothing about what had happened during the training accident, nothing about whether her children would wake up tomorrow with their father still in their lives. The security guard was making his rounds now, walking the perimeter of the waiting area. As he passed near Sarah's chair, she caught his eye and saw something there that surprised her. It wasn't just professional concern or polite sympathy. There was a deeper understanding, the kind that could only come from someone who had walked a similar path. For a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah felt a strange sense of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met before. The guard nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle that anyone else might have missed it, but Sarah understood it immediately. It was the nod of one military family member to another, a silent acknowledgement of shared understanding and mutual respect. Then he continued his rounds, and Sarah was left wondering if she'd imagined the entire exchange. But something about that brief moment of connection gave her a small measure of comfort in the endless uncertainty of the waiting room, where time seemed suspended and every second felt like an hour. Midnight came and went without any word from the medical staff. Sarah had now been waiting for over 2 hours, and the emergency room had taken on a different atmosphere. The rush of evening emergencies had died down, leaving behind a smaller group of families dealing with more serious situations. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher now, casting everything in stark relief. Sarah's phone battery was down to 15%, and she realized she'd forgotten to bring a charger in her panic to get to the hospital. She'd already called her mother twice for updates on the children, and each conversation had been more difficult than the last. Emma had woken up asking for her father, and Jake had cried himself back to sleep after having a nightmare. The new security guard continued his methodical rounds, but Sarah noticed he was paying particular attention to her area of the waiting room. At first, she wondered if there was some kind of security concern, but gradually she realized his attention seemed more protective than suspicious. When a drunk man had stumbled in earlier, arguing with the reception staff and making other families uncomfortable, the guard had handled the situation with quiet efficiency, never raising his voice, but somehow commanding immediate respect. Around 12:30 a.m., Sarah's composure finally began to crack in earnest. She'd been holding back tears for hours, but the combination of exhaustion, fear, and helplessness was becoming overwhelming. She walked to the bathroom, hoping to splash cold water on her face and regain her composure, but when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her usually neat brown hair was disheveled from running her hands through it. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, and her clothes were still damp from the rain. She looked like exactly what she was, a terrified wife who didn't know if her husband was going to live through the night. When she returned to the waiting area, she found the security guard standing near her chair. He'd moved so quietly that she hadn't noticed his approach, another sign of military training. As she sat down, he cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is your husband military?" Sarah looked up at him, surprised by the question. Up close, she could see that he was younger than she'd initially thought, probably mid-20s, with the kind of alert eyes that missed very little. His name tag read Davidson, and below was a small pin that she recognized as an Army Service Medal. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Special Forces. There was an accident during training." Davidson nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "I figured as much. I've been watching you for the past couple hours, and you have that look. Military spouse. You know how to wait, but this is different." Sarah felt tears threatening again at his understanding tone. "I've been through deployments, injuries, all of it. But this not knowing anything, it's killing me." "What's his unit?" Davidson asked, settling into the chair next to her. Normally, this might have seemed unprofessional for a security guard, but something about his manner suggested this was more than just idle conversation. "3rd Special Forces Group," Sarah replied. "He's a medic. They said it was a training accident, but they won't tell me anything else." Davidson was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see him processing this information. 3rd Group runs some pretty intense training scenarios. Sometimes accidents happen, even with all the safety protocols. But those medics are tough. They know how to take care of themselves and their teammates. There was something in his voice that caught Sarah's attention. "You sound like you know the unit." "I should," Davidson said with a slight smile. "I was with 2nd Group until about 6 months ago. Got out after my contract was up, decided to go back to school. This job helps pay the bills while I figure out what comes next." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "So, you know what kind of training they do? What kind of accidents could happen?" Davidson hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "Look, Mrs. Martinez." "Sarah Martinez." "Mrs. Martinez, I don't want to speculate about something I don't know the details of. But I can tell you that the training these guys do is designed to prepare them for the worst possible situations. Sometimes that means pushing limits, and sometimes accidents happen. But the medical care they get is the best in the world. If your husband is here instead of the base hospital, it probably means they want to use civilian specialists for something specific." This information was both comforting and terrifying. It suggested Miguel's injuries might be serious enough to require specialized care, but it also meant he was getting the best possible treatment. "The waiting is the hardest part," Davidson continued. "When I was deployed, I always worried more about what was happening back home than what was happening to me. My wife used to say the same thing you're going through now. Not knowing is worse than knowing, even if the news is bad." Sarah looked at him with new understanding. "Your wife was military too?" "Ex-wife now," Davidson said with a rueful expression. "Military life is tough on relationships. We couldn't make it work once I got out. Different dreams, I guess." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the late-night activity of the hospital. Sarah felt less alone than she had all evening. Having someone who understood the unique stresses of military life made an enormous difference. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said finally. "Sure. Do you think they would have told me if he was—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Davidson turned to face her fully. "If your husband had died, you would have been notified immediately. The fact that you're here, waiting for a doctor, means he's alive, and they're working on him. That's good news, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. It seemed so obvious now, but in her panic and exhaustion, she hadn't thought through the implications of being asked to wait rather than being given immediate news. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than she'd meant anything in hours. "I needed to hear that." Davidson checked his watch. "My supervisor should be making his rounds soon. When he does, I might not be able to sit and talk like this. But I want you to know that if you need anything at all, just let me know." Military families look out for each other. As if summoned by his words, an older man in a supervisor's uniform appeared from around the corner. Davidson immediately stood and resumed his professional posture, nodding politely to Sarah before moving away to continue his rounds. But the conversation had changed everything for Sarah. For the first time since arriving at the hospital, she felt like she could breathe properly. Miguel was alive. He was getting the best possible care. And she wasn't facing this alone. At 1:15 a.m., the security doors opened again, and this time a doctor called her name. Sarah's heart jumped as she stood, her legs unsteady after sitting for so long. As she walked toward the doors, she caught Davidson's eye one more time. He gave her that same subtle nod she'd noticed earlier, but now she understood what it meant. It meant she was strong enough for whatever came next. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was a trauma surgeon in her early 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that had seen every kind of emergency imaginable. She led Sarah down a corridor lined with medical equipment and into a small consultation room with 2 chairs and a box of tissues prominently placed on the table between them. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Dr. Walsh. I've been treating your husband since he arrived." The doctor's voice was calm and professional, but not unkind. "First, let me tell you that Miguel is alive and stable. His injuries are serious, but not life-threatening." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. She gripped the arms of her chair to steady herself as Dr. Walsh continued. "Your husband sustained multiple injuries during what I understand was a rappelling accident during night training. He has 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a significant concussion. We've also found some internal bleeding that we needed to address surgically." The word surgically hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Surgery? Is he out of surgery now?" "He came out about 30 minutes ago. The surgery went very well. We were able to stop the internal bleeding and repair the damage to his spleen. The orthopedic team has reset his shoulder, and we're managing his other injuries with medication and monitoring." Dr. Walsh leaned forward slightly. "The concussion is our biggest concern right now. He's been unconscious since the accident, which was about 4 hours ago. We're monitoring his brain function closely, but his scans look good. No signs of brain swelling or permanent damage." Sarah tried to process all this information. When will he wake up? With concussions, especially significant ones like this, it's hard to predict exactly. It could be hours, it could be a day or 2. Every brain heals differently. But all his vital signs are strong, and his body is responding well to treatment. "Can I see him?" Dr. Walsh smiled for the first time since they'd started talking. "Of course. He's in the intensive care unit now, where we can monitor him closely. I have to warn you, he looks worse than he is. The machines and tubes can be frightening, but they're helping him heal." They walked through a maze of corridors, past nurses' stations humming with quiet activity, and rooms where families maintained bedside vigils. The ICU was a different world entirely, with sophisticated monitoring equipment and nurses who moved with the precision of air traffic controllers managing critical situations. Miguel's room was the 3rd one on the left, and Sarah paused in the doorway to prepare herself. Dr. Walsh's warning had been accurate. Her husband looked smaller than she'd ever seen him, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with electronic life. His left arm was in a sling, and his face was bruised and swollen, but he was breathing on his own. "The bruising looks terrible, but it's mostly superficial," Dr. Walsh explained, noticing Sarah's expression. "Head injuries always look worse than they are because the face has so many blood vessels close to the surface." Sarah approached the bed slowly, afraid to touch him, but desperate for physical connection. She settled for taking his right hand in both of hers, careful not to disturb the 4 line running into his arm. "Can he hear me?" "We don't know for certain, but many patients in similar situations later report being aware of conversations around them. Talk to him. It certainly won't hurt, and it might help both of you." Dr. Walsh left them alone, promising to return in a few hours to check on Miguel's progress. Sarah pulled a chair close to the bed and began the vigil she'd maintained through 2 deployments and countless training exercises, though never in circumstances quite like these. "Hey, babe," she said softly, feeling slightly foolish but needing to fill the silence. "The kids are asking about you. Emma wanted to know if you'd be home for breakfast, and Jake had a nightmare. Mom's staying with them, so they're fine." She talked about ordinary things: Emma's upcoming school play, Jake's new fascination with dinosaurs, the leaky faucet in the kitchen that Miguel had been meaning to fix. Anything to maintain the connection between them, and to convince herself that this was temporary, that they would soon be back to their normal life of everyday problems and small domestic concerns. Around 3 a.m., a nurse named Patricia came in to check Miguel's vital signs and adjust his medications. She was an older woman with kind eyes and gentle hands, clearly experienced with the particular challenges of ICU families. "How are you holding up, honey?" Patricia asked as she worked. "Better now that I can see him," Sarah replied honestly. "The waiting was the worst part. It always is. But his numbers are looking really good. Heart rate steady, blood pressure normal, no signs of complications from the surgery. Dr. Walsh is one of the best trauma surgeons in the state. Your husband is in excellent hands." Patricia finished her checks and made notes on a tablet. "Have you eaten anything since you got here?" Sarah realized she hadn't thought about food since dinner, which felt like days ago instead of hours. "No, I guess I haven't. There's a cafeteria on the 2nd floor that's open 24 hours. Nothing fancy, but decent coffee and sandwiches. You should try to eat something. These vigils can go on for a while, and you need to keep your strength up." It was good advice, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to leave Miguel's side. What if he woke up while she was gone? What if something went wrong? Patricia seemed to understand her reluctance. "Tell you what, I'll have someone bring you a sandwich and coffee. You don't have to leave the room." 20 minutes later, a young orderly appeared with a turkey sandwich and a cup of coffee that was stronger than anything Sarah would normally drink, but exactly what she needed. As she ate, she continued talking to Miguel, telling him about the kind nurse and the security guard who had helped her through the worst hours of waiting. "You'd like him," she said, thinking about Davidson. "He was Special Forces too. Just got out a few months ago. He knew how to talk to me, knew what I needed to hear. Military families looking out for each other, just like you always say." Around 4 a.m., Sarah's exhaustion caught up with her despite the coffee. She'd been running on adrenaline and fear for hours, and now that she knew Miguel was stable, her body was demanding rest. She tried to stay awake, afraid of missing any change in his condition, but her eyelids grew heavy. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, someone was gently shaking her shoulder. Sarah jerked awake, immediately looking toward Miguel's bed to make sure he was okay. It was Patricia, the night nurse, with a concerned expression. "Mrs. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. Says he's a friend of your husband from base." Sarah looked toward the doorway and saw a familiar figure in Army ACUs. Carlos Rivera had been Miguel's best friend since they'd gone through Special Forces training together 5 years ago. He was shorter than Miguel, but built like a tank, with the kind of confidence that came from successfully completing missions that most people couldn't even imagine. "Sarah," Carlos said, crossing the room in 2 quick strides. "I'm so sorry I didn't get here sooner. We were in the field when it happened, and they couldn't reach me until an hour ago." Sarah stood up and found herself wrapped in a bear hug that smelled like army soap and the outdoors. Carlos had always treated her like a little sister, and his presence brought both comfort and a flood of new tears. "What happened, Carlos?" "They won't tell me anything about the accident." Carlos pulled back and looked at Miguel with the critical eye of someone trained to assess injuries under pressure. Night rappelling exercise. Miguel was the first one down, testing the anchor points for the rest of the team. Something went wrong with his equipment, and he fell about 20 feet. Could have been much worse. Equipment failure? Sarah felt a flash of anger. Miguel was meticulous about checking his gear. It was one of the things that had kept him alive through multiple deployments. "That's what they're investigating," Carlos said carefully. "But, Sarah, I need you to know something. Miguel did everything right. When his primary line failed, he tried to deploy his backup, and that slowed his fall enough to save his life. His training kicked in, even in those few seconds. He's alive because he's good at what he does. This information was both devastating and reassuring. Sarah was grateful for Miguel's skill and training, but horrified that equipment failure could happen despite all safety protocols. The whole team sends their love, Carlos continued. Everybody wants a visit, but the CEO is limiting it to family for now. Miguel's going to be fine, Sarah. He's too stubborn to let a little fall keep him down. Despite everything, Sarah found herself smiling at Carlos's attempt at humor. It was exactly what Miguel would say if their situations were reversed. Carlos stayed for about an hour, filling Sarah in on details about the accident that the medical staff couldn't provide. The training exercise had been routine, something the team had done hundreds of times before. Miguel had volunteered to go first, as he often did, wanting to ensure the safety of his teammates. The investigation would determine exactly what had gone wrong with his equipment, but the initial assessment suggested a manufacturing defect in one of the carabiners. The crazy thing is, Carlos said, Miguel was talking about you and the kids just before we started the exercise. He got a text from Emma about her school play, and he was showing everyone the picture she drew of the family. He was so proud of that little girl's artwork. Sarah smiled through her tears. Emma had been working on that drawing for weeks, carefully coloring each family member and adding details like Miguel's army uniform and Sarah's favorite blue sweater. The idea that Miguel had been thinking of his family in what might have been his final moments was both heartbreaking and beautiful. He's going to want to see that drawing when he wakes up, Carlos continued. You should bring it tomorrow. After Carlos left, promising to check in later that day, Sarah settled back into her vigil. The ICU had a different rhythm during the early morning hours. Nurses moved more quietly, and the beeping of monitors seemed less urgent. Sarah found herself hypnotized by the steady rise and fall of Miguel's chest, proof that he was still with her. Around 6 a.m., Dr. Walsh returned for her morning rounds. She checked Miguel's chart and examined him carefully, noting his responses to various tests. His pupils are responding well to light, which is a very good sign, she told Sarah. The swelling in his brain is minimal, and all his other injuries are healing as expected. I'm optimistic that he'll regain consciousness within the next 12 to 24 hours. And when he does, will he be normal? Based on what we're seeing now, I expect a full recovery. He may have some short-term memory issues around the time of the accident, which is common with concussions. He might not remember the fall itself or the few hours before it happened, but his long-term memory and cognitive function should be unaffected. This news lifted a weight from Sarah's chest that she'd been carrying since arriving at the hospital. Miguel would recover. He would come home to his family. They would get through this crisis just as they'd gotten through everything else the Army had thrown at them. Mrs. Martinez, Dr. Walsh continued, you've been here all night. I strongly recommend you go home, shower, get some real rest. We'll call you immediately if there's any change in his condition. Sarah shook her head automatically. I can't leave him. I understand the impulse, but you need to take care of yourself too. Your children need you to be strong when your husband wakes up. That means eating properly, sleeping, and not wearing yourself out during what could be a long recovery process. Logically, Sarah knew the doctor was right. She was exhausted, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and she needed to be home when Emma and Jake woke up. But the thought of leaving Miguel alone, even for a few hours, felt like abandonment. Tell you what, Dr. Walsh suggested. Why don't you go home for a few hours this morning? Come back this afternoon, and I'll arrange for you to have a more comfortable chair in the room. We can also set up a cot if you want to stay overnight again. Sarah considered this compromise. Emma and Jake would be worried about their father, and they needed their mother's presence and reassurance. Her own mother had been watching them all night and needed relief. And honestly, Sarah needed to process everything that had happened in familiar surroundings. Okay, she said finally, but you'll call me if anything changes? Anything at all. I promise. Sarah gathered her purse and jacket, but Before leaving, she leaned down to kiss Miguel's forehead. His skin was warm and slightly rough with stubble, reassuringly normal despite the medical equipment surrounding him. "I'll be back this afternoon, babe," she whispered. "Emma and Jake need to know you're okay, and then I'm coming right back. Don't you dare wake up without me here." The elevator ride down to the main floor felt strange after hours in the controlled environment of the ICU. The hospital was waking up for the day's shift, with medical staff arriving for work and families beginning their own vigils. Sarah realized she'd lived through one of the longest nights of her life. As she walked through the emergency room lobby, she looked around for Davidson, the security guard who had helped her through the worst hours of waiting. A different guard was on duty now, an older man reading a newspaper behind the information desk. Sarah felt a small pang of disappointment. She wanted to thank Davidson for his kindness, to let him know how much his understanding had meant to her. The morning air was crisp and clean after the previous night's rain. Sarah's car was one of only a few left in the parking lot, and she realized she'd been at the hospital for over 8 hours. The drive home took her through neighborhoods that were just beginning their daily routines. Joggers on sidewalks, dogs being walked, newspapers being collected from driveways. Normal life continuing while her own world had been turned upside down. Her mother's car was still in the driveway, and Sarah felt a wave of gratitude for the support system that had allowed her to focus entirely on Miguel during the crisis. She opened the front door quietly, hoping not to wake the children if they were still sleeping. "Sarah," her mother's voice came from the kitchen, where she was making coffee and toast. "How is he?" "Alive. Stable. They think he'll make a full recovery." Sarah found herself crying again, but these were tears of relief rather than fear. "He's unconscious, but the doctor says that's normal with concussions. He should wake up today or tomorrow." Her mother wrapped her in a hug that smelled like home and safety. "Thank God. I've been praying all night. The children know something serious happened, but I told them Daddy was in the hospital getting better and that you would tell them more when you got home." Sarah looked toward the stairs leading to the bedrooms. "Are they awake?" "Emma is. She's been up for about an hour, worried about you and her father. Jake is still sleeping. I think you should talk to Emma first. Let her know everything is going to be okay." Sarah climbed the stairs to her daughter's room, where Emma was sitting on her bed in pajamas, clutching the stuffed elephant Miguel had brought her from his last deployment. Emma looked up with eyes that were too serious for a 6-year-old, and Sarah's heart broke a little more. "Is Daddy going to be okay, Mommy?" Sarah sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Emma into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart. Daddy got hurt during training, but the doctors are taking very good care of him. He's sleeping right now while his body gets better, but he's going to be fine. Can we go see him?" "Not yet. The hospital has special rules about children visiting, but as soon as Daddy is feeling better, we'll go see him. Maybe in a day or two." Emma seemed to accept this explanation. "Grandma said you were with him all night." "I was. I wanted to make sure he wasn't alone. And you know what? He had that picture you drew right with him when the accident happened. Uncle Carlos told me Daddy was showing it to all his friends." Emma's face brightened slightly. "Really? He likes my picture?" "He loves your picture. And he loves you and Jake more than anything in the world. That's why he's going to get better quickly, so he can come home to us." After talking with Emma, and then with Jake when he woke up, Sarah managed to eat some breakfast and take a shower. The hot water felt amazing after the long night in the hospital, and she began to feel more human as she put on clean clothes and prepared to return to Miguel's bedside. But first, she had a stop to make. Sarah returned to Memorial Hospital around 2 p.m., carrying a small bag with items Miguel might want when he woke up, his favorite pillow from home, the drawing Emma had made, and a photo of the family from their last vacation. The afternoon shift brought different energy to the hospital, with more visitors and a generally busier atmosphere. As she walked through the emergency room lobby toward the elevators, she spotted Davidson sitting at a small table in a hospital cafeteria. He was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a college sweatshirt, with textbooks spread in front of him. Sarah approached his table, feeling suddenly nervous about interrupting his personal time. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I hope I'm not bothering you." I wanted to thank you for last night. Davidson looked up and immediately smiled. Mrs. Martinez, how is your husband doing? Much better. The doctors say he should make a full recovery. He's still unconscious, but they expect him to wake up soon. Sarah hesitated, then continued. I wanted you to know how much it meant to me, having someone who understood what I was going through. You probably saved my sanity during those first few hours. Davidson closed his textbook and gestured to the empty chair across from him. Please sit down. I'm glad I could help. That's what we do for each other, right? Military families. Sarah sat down, noticing the textbook was for a psychology class. Are you studying to be a therapist? Counseling psychology, specializing in veterans' issues. I figured I'd had enough therapy myself after getting out that I might be able to help other guys through the transition. Davidson grinned. Plus, this job gives me plenty of practice observing people in crisis situations. That's wonderful. The military needs more people who understand what veterans go through. They talked for a few more minutes about his studies and Miguel's prognosis. Davidson seemed genuinely interested in the outcome, and Sarah realized how rare it was to find someone who truly understood both the military lifestyle and the unique stresses that came with it. Can I ask you something? Sarah said as she prepared to leave. Last night, when you first came over to talk to me, you said I had that look. What did you mean? Davidson was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. Military spouses have a particular way of handling stress. You're trained to be strong, to wait, to deal with uncertainty. But this was different. You had that same look my ex-wife used to get when I was deployed, and she didn't hear from me for weeks. It's not just worry, it's that specific fear that comes from loving someone whose job puts them in danger. Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The waiting is always the hardest part. Always. But you handled it like a pro. Your husband is lucky to have you. Sarah made her way up to the ICU, feeling more at peace than she had since the whole ordeal began. Miguel's room was exactly as she'd left it, except that someone had placed a more comfortable reclining chair next to his bed. A nurse she hadn't met before was checking his monitors and making notes. Mrs. Martinez? I'm Jennifer, the day shift nurse. Dr. Walsh asked me to let you know that your husband's brain activity has been increasing over the past few hours. We're seeing more normal sleep patterns, which usually means consciousness isn't far away. Sarah's heart jumped. Could he wake up today? Very possibly. His body is healing faster than we initially expected. The surgery site looks great, his concussion symptoms are improving, and all his vital signs are strong. Sarah settled into the new chair and took Miguel's hand. His fingers felt warmer than they had the night before, and she could swear his grip was slightly stronger. Miguel? It's Sarah. I'm here, babe. The kids are fine. They're asking about you, and Emma wants to show you her new drawing when you get home. For the next 3 hours, Sarah maintained a steady stream of conversation, sharing news from home, updates from Carlos and his unit, and plans for his recovery. She read him get-well messages that had been texting to her phone from other military wives in their community. Around 5:30 p.m., as Sarah was telling Miguel about Jake's latest dinosaur fascination, she felt his fingers move in her hand. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but definitely intentional. Miguel, can you hear me, babe? His eyelids fluttered, and Sarah held her breath. Slowly, gradually, Miguel's eyes opened, unfocused at first, but gradually finding her face. Sarah, his voice was hoarse and barely above a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. I'm here. You're in the hospital, but you're going to be fine. You had an accident during training, but you're going to be okay. Miguel tried to sit up, but winced at the pain in his ribs. How long? About 18 hours. You fell during a rappelling exercise. Equipment failure. Not your fault. Miguel processed this information slowly, his eyes moving around the room to take in the medical equipment and unfamiliar surroundings. The kids, they're fine. Emma drew you another picture, and Jake learned a new dinosaur name just to impress you when you get home. A slow smile spread across Miguel's bruised face. My girls take care of everything. Always, Sarah said, leaning down to kiss his forehead carefully. Carlos was here earlier. He said to tell you that you're too stubborn to let a little fall keep you down. Carlos is an idiot, Miguel said with affection. But he's not wrong. Dr. Walsh arrived within minutes of being called, and her examination confirmed what everyone could see. Miguel was alert, responsive, and well on his way to recovery. The concussion had been serious, but not severe enough to cause lasting damage. His other injuries would heal with time and physical therapy. "You're very lucky, Sergeant Martinez," Dr. Walsh told him. "Your wife hasn't left your side, and your training probably saved your life. The way you deployed your backup line during the fall slowed your descent enough to prevent much more serious injuries." Miguel squeezed Sarah's hand. "I remember thinking about Emma's drawing just before everything went wrong. Funny what goes through your mind." As evening approached, Miguel was moved from the ICU to a regular room, a clear sign that his condition was stable. The new room was larger and more comfortable, with a window overlooking the hospital's garden area and a fold-out chair where Sarah could sleep if she chose to stay another night. Carlos returned around 7 p.m., bringing with him messages from Miguel's entire unit and a care package from the wives group that included homemade cookies, magazines, and a card signed by dozens of people from their military community. "The investigation is ongoing," Carlos told Miguel, "but initial findings confirm equipment failure. Nothing you could have prevented or predicted." Miguel nodded, clearly relieved to know that the accident hadn't been caused by human error or negligence. In their line of work, the difference between equipment failure and personal mistake could affect not just legal proceedings, but also future assignments and career prospects. "When can I get out of here?" Miguel asked Dr. Walsh during her evening rounds. "If you continue improving at this rate, probably in 3 to 4 days. But then you'll be on medical leave for several weeks while your ribs heal, and we monitor any lingering effect from the concussion. No physical training, no jumping out of airplanes, no rappelling off buildings." Miguel made a face at these restrictions, but Sarah could see the relief in his eyes. He was alive, he was going to recover fully, and he would be home with his family soon. That night, Sarah did choose to stay at the hospital, but for the first time since the accident, she slept peacefully. Miguel was awake, talking, and complaining about hospital food, all positive signs that her husband was going to be fine. Around midnight, during one of the nurse's routine checks, Miguel was wide awake despite the late hour. "Thank you," he said quietly to Sarah, who had dozed off in the chair beside his bed. "For what?" "For being exactly who I needed you to be. Carlos told me you were here all night, not knowing if I was going to make it. That couldn't have been easy." Sarah thought about Davidson, the security guard whose understanding had helped her through the worst hours of waiting. She thought about the strength she'd found when she needed it most, the support of their military community, and the love that had sustained her through 18 hours of uncertainty. "We take care of each other," she said, echoing the words Davidson had used. "That's what we do." Miguel smiled and closed his eyes, finally able to rest knowing his family was safe and whole. Sarah settled back in her chair, watching the steady rhythm of his breathing and listening to the quiet sounds of the hospital at night. Tomorrow they would begin the process of healing and recovery, but tonight they were simply grateful to be together. Outside the window, the first light of dawn was beginning to appear on the horizon, marking the end of one of the longest nights of their lives, and the beginning of their journey back to normal. Sarah squeezed Miguel's hand gently and whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for skilled medical professionals, for friends who understood, and for the strength to endure whatever challenges military life might bring their way. In a few hours, she would call Emma and Jake to tell them that their daddy was awake and asking about them. She would thank the medical staff who had saved her husband's life, and she would begin the process of helping Miguel heal from both his physical and emotional wounds. But for now, she was content to sit beside his bed, holding his hand and listening to him breathe, knowing that their family had survived another crisis and emerged stronger than before.